Shalom, hello, and welcome to the Boris Mints Institute 2020 Research Conference. My name is Steve Lindy, the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Report, and it's my pleasure to be hosting this fascinating and innovative conference live from Israel with a global audience joining us online. The title of this year's conference is Israeli Innovation for a Better World, and its aim is to provide a global platform for world-leading researchers working with the Boris Mints Institute at Tel Aviv University to create a greener future and tackle social inequalities. Before we start the varied program, we will have some opening statements, and the first is from Dr. Boris Mints, who founded the Boris Mints Institute in 2015 as an academic center at Tel Aviv University to encourage research and innovation that promotes significant positive change in the world. 5 years later, and Dr. Mintz's vision is already a reality, as today's presentations will show. Over to you, Dr. Mintz, for your words of introduction.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I would like to thank Dr. Igor Lukšić and the initiator of the session in the Institute online. We supported this initiative with great pleasure. The past year was not an ordinary one. We all have faced a trial, the pandemic, but despite this, the result achieved during the year allow me to give the highest praise when it comes to the work on the Institute. Big projects with our partners from India and Kenya have been developing. Delegation from ICIPE came to Tel Aviv to discuss future potential projects and programs. One of the most significant events of the past year was a conference in Rome, which was held in Rome in partnership with the Link Campus University. The conference was attended by prominent diplomats, scientists, and experts. The discussion was very interesting and informative. I'm sure that its results will be used in the future in the practice of the conflict resolution. In May 2020, we also presented the Institute's annual prize to Professor Sabina Alkaya, Director of the Poverty and Human Development Initiative at the University of Oxford. Despite the fact that the ceremony was held online, hundreds of people took part in it. I hope that in the nearest future, we will be able to meet in person and discuss options for our potential collaboration. In my opinion, it is extremely significant that we have opened a new research lab that will investigate current demographic challenges and will be led by Dr. Isaac Sesson. Moreover, I would like to personally congratulate all of our graduating students, both PhD and masters, wishing them all the best in the future. In conclusion, I would like to express my hope that the next year will be even more successful in terms of the result achieved by the Institute. I would like to express my deep gratitude to the President of TAO, Professor Ariel Parat, and of course to the head of Institute, Professor Itai Senat, our wonderful partners and every researcher, student, and the team member of the Institute for the work this year. Thank you very much, everyone who found the opportunity to be with us today. I'm very happy to see the members of the International Advisory Board. Dear members, thank you very much. Thank you all again.
Thank you so much for those words of hope, Dr. Mints, and thank you for making today's exciting conference and the work of the entire Boris Mints Institute possible. Our second opening statement will be given by Professor Itai Sened, the founding head of the School of Social and Policy Studies at Tel Aviv University and head of the Boris Mints Institute. The floor is yours, Professor Sened.
So I would like to follow the hopeful message we just received from Dr. Mints. And we live through a very, very difficult period, and people tend to become sad and depressed and underwhelmed and overwhelmed. The beauty shown in this conference and in the work of the Boris Mints Institute all around the last 5 years, and particularly in the last year, has to do with a very important group that was particularly hit by this pandemic. And these are the youngsters, the young, bright people that started something, that began to work on something, and all of a sudden everything had to stop. And everybody talks these days about the C generation, the 30-something or the close to 30 men and women whose life came to a halt and whose career was stopped halfway, and where they have this significant concern about their role in the world in the future years. And to those individuals and all of us who think of them, the Boris Mints in this particular event and throughout our work has a very, very positive and hopeful message. And that is that this pandemic will pass, but the opportunities that it will endow all of us will stay. And this year, we graduated several PhD students. Other PhD students are up and coming. They're all in this C generation, late 20s, early 30s. But today's presentation will be populated by very young scholars supported by the Mints Institute. And each one of them, in his or her way, will continue this optimist message that Dr. Mints started with, and that I wish to extend and pass along to the researchers that will now present their work, and they will cover 4 very, very different areas of research. But what is common to all of the 4 presentations, very important presentations indeed, is the fact that they all embody a hope for the future, that they all demonstrate a future that is brighter, that is going to allow us to achieve new significant scientific achievements, but most importantly, as far as the Institute is concerned, to mark the vision and the horizon for a much, much better future to come. So I don't want to stand between all of you and the wonderful presentations awaiting us. And so I will conclude at that. Thank you very much, Boris Mints, for making all of this possible. See how your generosity has transformed into this wonderful organization that has been able to achieve so much in a relatively short period of time. And as you suggested, and as I promised, there is so much yet to come.
Thank you.
Senate, thank you for you. Without you, it is not possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sennett. And thank you to Dr. Mints for that hopeful formal opening of this year's conference. And we will now commence, as Professor Sennett said, the presentations from a number of world-leading researchers. The conference will be split into two parts. The first two presentations focus on the theme of creating a greener future for our world. We will then have some time for questions, so please submit any questions you might have using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen on Zoom. Then we will have 4 varied presentations on tackling social inequality, both inside Israel and in the world at large, followed by another short period of time for questions. As viewers, you have a chance to submit any questions you might have using the Q&A feature on Zoom. So please share your questions that can be put to each speaker after their presentation. And now, without further ado, allow me to introduce our first presenter, Professor Hadas Maman. Professor Maman is head of the Environmental Engineering Program at the Faculty of Engineering at Tel Aviv University. Working closely with the Boris Mints Institute, Professor Maman will be leading a project to transform Tel Aviv University's Naftali building into a living ecosystem and research lab. She is here to tell us more about this exciting and innovative project and how it can serve as a blueprint for the green transformation of urban environments. Professor Maman.
Thank you very much. I would like to share my presentation. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. To Boris Mints, Itai Sened, and everyone that is present here. When you look at this picture, or at least when I look at this picture, what I think is about a dream. And what is actually a dream? And I would like to guide and follow you through what we dream of. So our dream is to construct a green wall at the Naftali building. But then you might say it's only a green wall, but we don't want that our green wall will be just another plant in the wall. We have other dreams. We want to make it different. And in order to make it different, we want the green wall actually to be our playground. And if you reflect back to your childhood, what would be a playground? A playground would be a place to play, explore, imagine, connect, think out of the box, breathe air, and all these things. So this is what a playground means. And I would like to follow with this on the playground of Tel Aviv University. So we want the green wall to be a place where we could study plants, study water, and energy in one lab. And this lab will be actually a living lab. And I want to guide through a few slides on what is our vision and how we can make this green wall our dream and our living lab. Okay, so we know that green walls actually have different services. So they provide social health and well-being of benefits, well-being. However, it does have a positive impact on our mental being. The green walls can inspire critical thinking. And if you look at this picture here, this is actually a green wall from the London School of Economics and Political Sciences. So I think the Naftali building is actually a wonderful place to have a green wall. And with this green wall, we can induce education to students, have green student challenges, explore the natural environment, and possibly even have classes outside the building of the green wall. And this is where we can actually teach. So the green wall can also have other impacts. For example, if we look at this slide, we see here dirty water that is filtered through membranes. And we can study, for example, the impact of clean water versus salty water on plants that are tolerant to salt. And why is this a global challenge? And this is actually the flag of the Boris Mints Institute, because if we look at what happens in many developing countries, actually there's a situation that due to overpumping of groundwater, the water becomes more salty, and it's not possible to drink this water. And therefore, in urban settings, in some places where the people have more money, they actually build low pressure reverse osmosis systems to desalinate their water. But then all the residuals or the concentrate is just dumped to the environment. So what if we can build a green wall within a house or a complex building where the water that is actually very salty is used to actually irrigate or water the green wall? So this is another service that we can actually research and then implement in Tel Aviv University or in Delhi. It could be everywhere. Within this green wall, we can also study many other impacts. For example, we can study the cooling effect. So we know that there is a major problem with urban settings, and this is the urban heat islands. So, and this is a real impact in cities. And what if this green wall can actually insulate and regulate the temperature of the building? It can maybe keep it warmer in the winter, cooler during the summer. In this way, even possibly, we may reduce electricity costs from actually having air condition. In addition to that, the green wall can help us provide protection against wind and rain. And possibly the plants can actually absorb the solar energy, but also reflect solar energy. So this way, the green wall can actually help us provide a more greener building. Now, as scientists and as students, we would definitely want to study these impacts. We would want to learn the impacts of different vegetation on the cooling effect, on the absorbance of UV, and on sound insulation. Another thing that we can do within the green wall is actually study the impact of the biomass in the plants on conversion of energy and on new materials. So for example, we can convert the plant into, for example, into fuel, into biofuels. And also we can actually study the impact of solar panels combined with, for example, green roof. Okay, we can also test new materials. So for example, if we look at this image below, this is actually a local place in India where they use ceramics as a place to put the plants in the green wall. So we can also combine with local materials. And then then the residual biomass from the plants, we can actually produce biochar. And biochar has many qualities. So biochar can actually hold up moisture within the plants. It can also provide many services as purifying contaminated water. So there's all kinds of services around the green wall that we as scientists can actually implement and learn. Another possibility, for example, and this is what hopefully we plan to do within the Naftali building, is actually separate the gray water from the black water. So black water is the water that goes to the toilet, and the gray water is all the hand washing and the kitchen and this type of water. So we can actually separate the black from the gray. The black will go to the sewage system, and the gray can go through a wetland, which will actually treat this gray water, and then it could be used for watering the green wall. So this is another thing that we can study actually and learn and understand. And in addition to that, this is actually a very important impact of the green wall, its ability to absorb carbon dioxide. And we all know about the harmful impacts of the global climate change. So just think about it. 1 meter square of a living wall can extract 2.3 kilograms of CO2 per year and actually produce 1.7 kilograms of oxygen. And in addition to that, the green walls, the plants, can absorb particles, from the air and air pollutants. So the green wall can actually help us to combat the global climate change and actually produce a better environment near the green wall. And within this environment, actually, our students can sit outside of the class, breathe good air, have good conditions to study. This way, I don't know if the university will approve, but this is a possibility. In addition to that, we can study biodiversity. So there are many scientists that are expert in pest management and in irrigation schemes. They're expert in fertilizers and plant biodiversity. So they can actually join this green wall and also study biodiversity. We can also test new sensors. So in the age of data science, we must rely on sensors actually to have an idea of what's happening within our green wall. So we can have, for example, gas sensors, temperature sensors, humidity sensors, light sensors, and water quality sensors. All these sensors could be connected to a central unit, which our students can actually design and check and implement. And this can be combined with the new data center at Tel Aviv University. And we can that way study the green wall, study the impact of our interventions, of the experiments that we are doing in order to understand what is happening within this green wall. And last but not least, we can study the economics and the life cycle analysis. And there are scientists at the Tel Aviv University, which are experts in economics and LCA. Other students and scientists which are expert in marketing, they can learn the branding. But we also must remember that we need to actually look at the maintenance of the building, replacement of the plants, water system, reduction in heating and energy. And then we need to evaluate, is the increase in the property value actually versus the cost of doing all these things? And we need to study these things in order to understand about our green wall. And I would like to end the presentation by this sentence. So we want this green wall to be a living wall. We want it to be a living lab. And we want the Naftali building actually to be the lab. And again, this will be a different lab than the lab that we are used to. So this will be a lab that will be an external lab, but will also impact the interior of the building. And we will have cross connection between the out and the in, and the in and the out, having students from all the different disciplines of the university coming and studying how we can do this. And actually, this is looking at retrofitting old buildings. And if we look at the Tel Aviv city, most of the buildings are actually not new buildings. So if we build a model, all of us together, and understanding how to make this happen, we can make this, make an impact. And this is our dream and our goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hadass Maman, for a wonderful presentation of a wonderful idea. I think we can all follow the project with interest, especially those based in Tel Aviv, who are able to watch the growth of the 30-meter-high green wall with some interest. And our second presentation carries on the theme of creating a greener future for all of us. The presenter is Hila Bar, Research and Development Manager at Vertical Field. Vertical Field is a research-oriented business based in Israel, which is working with the Boris Mints Institute to develop nature-based solutions for carbon-neutral cities and improved air quality. The floor is all yours, Hila Bar.
Unmute yourself.
Hila, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Hila, I think you should probably start again. We didn't hear the beginning of the presentation.
Okay, I will start again. Okay. So Vertical Field, an agtech leading company, develop and markets NBS, nature-based solution for food and landscaping in the urban ecosystem. Our mission is to create healthier, prettier environment that improve the quality of urban life. The lecture details a review of NBS with reference to VFK studies, includes recommendations for action in order to increase the potential of NBS technologies in environmental standards. NBS is an innovation solution that use natural elements to achieve environmental and social goals. NBS can address global challenges from climate change and urbanization in a sustainable way. By using ecosystem service, NBS are innovative solutions, offer significant potential to provide energy and responses to climate change, to enhance our natural capital. Vertical field clearly demonstrates the importance of taking a systematic approach to combine knowledge from different fields, such as urban planning, urban engineering, and public health, to address complex issues in a sustainable way. Here is our NBS pilot experiment in Bar-Ilan University, led by Professor Itamar Lenski. This is a binational research program funded by the Israeli Ministry of Science and Technology and the Israel Science Foundation. And we are very proud to be part of the first of its kind and the largest known nature-based solution pilot experiment. And together with key players from the research and the industry arenas, we are collaborating to assess the direct and indirect impact of the proposed NBS on indoor and outdoor urban environment. Our goal is to provide NBS solutions in line with the goals of the global challenge, carbon neutral cities, and in turn, improve air quality within cities, indoor and outdoor. The first case study is a famous supporting case study using NBS for a sustainable site. Is the building of the giant checkpoint security software. You can see how the retrofit process was carried out, in which buildings are upgraded, expanded, and renovated, and at the same time return green. The classic example of this is the vertical forest, like you see in the picture. This forest is a vegetation walls with a large roof garden at the building. The large roof garden of the 8th floor provide green areas and regulated the temperature below. Behind the natural and beautiful landscape we create, the green purpose of the forest of the vertical structure is the regulation of the temperature in the building by natural means. Everything here is environmental. The building has a gray water recycling system that waters the forest area. There is a combination of shading from the sun to reduce energy consumption in the building and to regulate the temperature inside. Another interesting case study is a vertical farming L28 culinary platform in Tel Aviv. Startup Nation Central has an established and well-maintained rooftop urban farm. And L28 restaurant uses its products for every dish on the menu, contributing to a more sustainable and livable Tel Aviv. Fewer food trucks for transport from farm centers means less traffic, means less pollution, and lower food costs. Growing understanding about the dependent relationship between our building, the environment, and our health help us create spaces that enhance our health and well-being. Designing building with evidence-based strategies, implementing nature-oriented products and methodologies can create spaces that have improved environmental impact, keep us moving, inspire, and make us thrive. Here is some picture from the restaurant roof. And another special case study is about Shuafat refugee camp, an urban community farm. And this project involves designing and building of a vertical vegetation system on an outdoor wall in the Shuafat refugee camp in East Jerusalem. Here is some picture from the project. This project, led by Dr. Anat Shechik from Bar-Ilan University, the overall objective of this project is to identify and estimate benefits and such nature-based solution can provide to low-income students. Our technology is simple to operate. The children and school staff operate the farm with great success. They are planting and harvesting fresh greens. We make it simple, and we now translate these benefits into measurable outcomes, such as increased well-being, decrease in school violence, improvement in learning achievements, and behavioral performance. And I save the best for last. Here is our innovative indoor urban farm. It's all about advancing innovative NBS globally, yes? And I like to show you a 1-minute video. Thank you for listening. And this is our geoponic method, smart soil-based platform. And I will finish with a conclusion, a recommendation. In order to achieve a sustainable site, we recommend to choosing NBS by following parameters. Life cycle analyze, a plan to reduce the product's life cycle impacts. Provide an extended manufacturer warranty. Bio-based or reused materials. Health declaration for the products. And science-based solution technologies. And I will like to say another thing that someone once said, that a mind is a terrible thing to waste. Countless hours of the most creative high-tech people are wasted on hard work. In NBS technologies, the difference between a product with a nice user experience and a product with a revolutionary user experience is what makes the difference. And it's not about what, it's about how, and it's all about people. So thank you for listening. And if you want to learn more, I invite you to email me and invite you to follow us on Facebook. Thank you.
Thank you, Hila Bao, and we certainly will follow you on Facebook. That was a really interesting presentation, which rounds off our first theme of the conference, creating a greener future. The second theme will focus on how to tackle poverty and social inequality, both here in Israel and around the world. I'll now open the floor to questions from the Boris Mints Institute board, either for Hadass or Hila. Does anyone have a question? If no one has a question, and feel free to put a question in the bottom of your Zoom screen. Perhaps I'll ask Hadass and Hila myself, how has the coronavirus affected your work? Hadass?
Actually, well, it did have a really positive impact, although I'm almost ashamed to say that, because we got a really important grant on a work that we're doing now in the Tel Aviv University in the botanical gardens, where we are converting plant biomass into biofuels. And this was funded by the Israeli Ministry of Science. And the idea is actually to generate not biofuels as an ethanol, but as a sanitizing material. And our proposal was waste to alcohol. So it had a positive impact, although I'm almost ashamed to say that.
And Hila, we saw that those pictures of that beautiful restaurant in Tel Aviv. Is that restaurant open during this pandemic?
Yes, it is.
So your project is continuing as if there's no virus?
You know, there is awareness now to food security, to air pollution, and so on. So our technology is very relevant in those days.
Let me ask again if there's a member of the Boris Mints Institute board who would like to ask either of our speakers a question. So I think we're going to proceed with the conference. And the second section will focus on tackling social inequalities and poverty, both in Israel and worldwide. We will hear from 4 outstanding researchers. Before again, there will be time for questions.
Excuse me, Steve. But I believe there are some questions on the Q&A down to the bottom of the screen. I think there are some questions to the panelists.
Yes, you're right. So we have one question from Professor Simeon Yankov. Are there similar studies in countries around the world? Hadass, would you like to answer that?
Okay, so I think maybe you relate to the idea of building, making the Green Wall a lab for students to study and research. I think that's pretty unique because we're taking an old building and with the help of vertical fields, implementing a green wall. But this wall will not be like something that you see in the high-tech companies or things like that. We will actually involve our students to learn, adapt, change, working with different solar energies, different water types, looking if it can change the air conditioning. So I think it's unique in that sense. And also most of the buildings in the city, in the Tel Aviv city, are actually old buildings. They're not new buildings. So if we can build together with our amazing team of people, something sustainable, that will have a huge impact.
Thank you. And there's a question from Matthew in London. Do you think green walls will become a feature of cities worldwide? Hadass, back to you.
I thought that was Hila because she comes from a commercial. I hope so, because thinking about the tipping point, we don't actually have much time. So the tipping point may be 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years, but we need to act now. And in order to act now, we need to act in a practical way with solutions that actually can be implemented. And this is what we want to do. We want to teach our students, involve them in green initiatives, and that way echo this, like in the university and outside.
Okay, and one last question from Barak, who has a question about the vertical garden. How do you manage pesticide on the outer wall of a building?
Let me pick up here to add to what Hadass just said, but also to answer the second question briefly. What we have learned in our labs at the Mints Institute, at the school, and at the Gordon Faculty of Social Sciences is, and we are seeing it almost everywhere we go, is that governments in the new era are proving themselves very ineffective in dealing with these global challenges. But fortunately for us, we have discovered through our work with our students that as our students, as Hila suggested, learn to appreciate and get the know-how of how to do these things, they simply go back to where they came from and they just implement it. And so I think that the best chance of spreading the word of green walls is exactly like Hila suggested, to just train the students to live in these green walls and to appreciate the wonders of these green walls. And then I am sure that this rather positive plague will spread probably even faster than the negative COVID we now live through. As to the second part, I would want to emphasize the second question, our collaboration with Tamar Dayan, who is the head of the new, relatively new, just inaugurated Museum of Natural History, and the specific specialization of the museum is precisely natural pesticides. That is pretty much tiny little animals that eat other tiny little animals, and they pretty much take care of their own world so that those insects that are harmful are eaten by those insects that are not harmful. And Tamar Dayan and her team, a very important team, will be engaged in this project and provide exactly this angle, as we have promised that this wall will take care of its own insect issues through natural and neutral taking care of these insects. So this will be another research team that will dedicate its entire time to make sure that harmful insects do not grow, do not harm anybody around the green wall.
Thank you, Professor Sennett, for those fascinating words. It really is an interesting topic. But let's now proceed to the second section of our conference on tackling social inequalities and poverty. And we're going to hear from 4 outstanding researchers before, again, there will be time for questions. Our first presenter is a very special woman, the first woman who was raised in a Haredi community in Israel to achieve a PhD, the first woman from that community to get a postdoctoral position, first at Princeton and now at Tel Aviv University. Her work is looks at the Ultra Orthodox or Haredi world through a social psychology lens, with a particular focus on how identity, social norms, and authority play a role in creating and preserving poverty in ultra-Orthodox society. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Nechumi Yaffe.
Okay. Hi. Hello. Hi. You hear me?
Yes,
Good.
We can hear you. And I
Amazing. And do you see my presentation?
Yes,
okay.
we do. But I think
Hi.
you should start from the beginning.
Okay, hello, hi. My name is Nechumi Yaffe, and I'm actually a faculty member at the Public Policy Department. I'm very happy to present my research today. My research that I did with a very special, wait, it's running. Very special PhD student, Estherina Trachtenberg. She is with the Sagol Neuroscience School at Tel Aviv University, and together we look at the psychological effect of COVID-19. So COVID, the corona hits the poor, hurting them so badly that actually the World Bank is claiming that the corona erased years of victory in the war against global poverty. But it's not just, pardon?
You want to share the presentation, not your own screen.
Do you see my, okay, do you see my, what do you see? I think there's a problem with the sharing. Do you see my presentation?
You should choose your presentation, not your own screen. There you go.
There is, okay. Is now better?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much for letting me know. Okay, so basically, it's not just the very bad forecast, it's actually what's going on. Corona targeted the poor communities. This data is showing, it's from New York City, but really we get the same data all over the world in all major cities. The poor neighborhoods, the poor communities are the ones who suffer the most from Corona. In Israel, the poorest community is the Haredi community. So it's, even if you like, look at the Haredi community versus the Israeli community, see the differences. And if you look at other disadvantaged groups in Israel, such as Arabs and immigrants, the Haredim are really soaring high. They are just the poorest of all. And as we all know, they were most affected by the corona virus. You know, a lot of people were sick, and some, people died in the community. But the impact of coronavirus is not just the sick and the dead, it's also the psychological impact. There is quite a lot of data showing that people are depressed, sad, anxious, and their measurements of well-being is substantially reduced. The World Health Organization is actually trying to promote all kinds of things to help it. And based on previous periods of quarantine, we have some data from the SARS time and from Ebola. We have some data showing that there are some proxies and some variables that actually promote this stress. So the main villain, as we all know, is the economical situation. People that were economically affected by corona show a very high level of stress, of anxiety. Their measurements of well-being really reduced, but there is some other variables as well. For example, apartment size was shown to be a proxy for mental state and also attitude towards quarantine. What wasn't there is, in all the studies that I looked at, no one is talking about religiosity. Is religiosity helping, decreasing? What's the role of religiosity within this coronavirus? So we were thinking that actually looking at religiosity within Israel could be quite an interesting case, since Israel is one of the only states that people identify themselves as on the quantum of religiosity. People will say, we are secular, we are religious Zionists, we are Ultra Orthodox. It's a very salient part of people's social identity. So it's quite interesting to see how they're reacting to the corona with through their religiosity levels. So let's look at the demographics. So you can see 45% of Israel is secular, then we have 25% was traditional, 16 religious, and 14 are Haredi. So if we're talking about Haredim and corona, let's see some features that relate to the community that might help us understand what's going on and their level of and high rate of cases. So as I said earlier, the Haredim are the poorest community. If you compare them to the rest of the general population, they have the average child part of family is 7, whereas the rest of the country, the general population is 2.5. and the apartment size is substantially even smaller, even though they have more kids. The average size apartment is substantially smaller, and this is throughout the country, the north and the south, all over. In our data, we are focusing on those three groups, on secular, Haredim, and a small, very interesting group that is called ODD. What's ODD? So some of you have maybe seen the new miniseries of Netflix, the Unorthodox, that I know there was a lot of buzz around it, so people got, to be familiar with this concept. So OTD really stands for off the derech. Derech is away. Those who are straight from the way. It's people that actually left the Ultra Orthodox community. There is a major work that is delving into the numbers, and the estimate is that between 10 to 20% of the Ultra Orthodox community people are actually living. And we're very lucky because this week on Sunday, the first academical major work on those people actually show light. This is a new book that just came out, analyzing people's stories through scientific measures, psychological, sociological, theological, and giving us some ways to really understand this phenomena better. This phenomenon has a lot of implication, especially when everyone is very worried about the demographics in Israel. So it's important. Usually it is very rare to get a sample from this group, because this group usually lives the community when it hurts, and they have like a trust issues, but the Esterina is the one who actually went a long way and got some information from those people. So we have a very rare and deep sample that can shed light on our findings. And we were looking at their mental, their well-being. We were using clinical measures. So the first one is the well measurement scale that has 14 items, with items such as I felt satisfied with my life, etc. It is subdivided to emotional, social, and psychological measures. The second one is the DAS. It's a scale made up of 21 items that are checking depression, anxiety, and stress, with items such as I had trouble being at ease, I had a hard time experiencing any positive feeling, etc. And given what we know from the world around us about the connection of Corona and economics, and seeing it as the main evil, we did take some economical measures. We asked people to assess their financial situation, and then we actually asked them, were you affected from Corona? And this was a yes and no answer. So let's first just see the results we got, and then we're going to try to understand it in a more nuanced way. So as you can see, our measures of well-being, MHS, the Ultra Orthodox group displayed a very high measurement of well-being, and this is significant relative to the secular group and to the OTD, those of the derech. And similar to this, we have very consistent measures showing that the Ultra Orthodox community is the least depressed on all the measure. And again, this is significant. And given the information that we know that actually they have all things going against them, and they should be really depressed and they should really be devastated, we wanted to understand it better. So we looked into the economical, the first aspect, and we asked people to define their economical situation. So you can see that actually our sample, the secular weren't so rich, the of the derech people were doing better, and the Ultra Orthodox and secular in our sample were more or less the same. Now we asked the second question, because it's not just about the assessment of your economical situation, it's, were you affected by Corona? Were you economically affected by Corona? And to this, we got this measures that actually showing that all the groups were affected by Corona. We can see that the derech were actually more affected, secular less, and the Ultra Orthodox were more or less affected. Now we factored it in, and we wanted to see, well, let's see how the economical measure is playing. So we divided all the scales like to their core units, and let's see the measurements. So as you can see, people that were of the derech and secular people that were affected by corona display lower measures of well-being, but this is not affecting the ultra Orthodox. The orange are the people that are economically affected by corona, but still their level of well-being is not budging. The same goes for the social compartment of the MHC. Again, people were affected, but it does not display any effect on their well-being. And the other measure, again, in the secular end of the derech sample, people that were economically affected by corona, their measurements of well-being were reduced, but it does not affect the ultra Orthodox, and this is the sum total. So you can see, yes, the ultra Orthodox community was affected by economically, but it did not change their well-being, which is amazing. Now, I think you get the point, but we're going to go through the data. You can see that on the depressed, the DAS measurement. So of the derech and the seculars that were affected economically by corona showed very high levels of depressions. The ultra Orthodox were just not budging. The same happened with anxiety. And we have to see that actually in anxiety, some people that were Haredi, ultra Orthodox that were affected by economically by corona showed some levels of anxiety, but still they are the least of all. And the same goes for the stress. They are affected by the corona. Those who are affected economically are affected. They are stressed, but still they are statistically less than ODT and secular. And the sum total is showing us that actually, yes, they are affected economically by corona, but this does not affect their depression level. So this data is actually very, very interesting because we know that numerically the community was severely affected during the first wave, and yet it displayed very strong mental resilience. And when we factor in that the ultra Orthodox community is the poorest, they live in the smallest apartment size. They have many more children compared to the other Israeli sectors. And all those children are around, they have no school, there is no internet to entertain them, they in between their feet, and they have everything going against them, and they still feel higher measures of strong mental resilience. So what is this? So what is it about being religious that help you to go with such positive attitude in these times of crisis? So I would like to suggest some explanations. So the first one is, spirituality as resilience. We have quite a lot of data showing that religious people display religiosity is associated with well-being. There's this verse in Proverbs from King Solomon that says that a man's spirit can sustain him through illness. So if you have God with you, it's quite a major force. So it helps you go through some hard times. And when you have spirituality and you give meaning to bad times, that it keeps you happy. Another point that I would like to make is this social capital issue. When I was preparing this presentation, I was looking at some headlines of newspaper in order to present you the fact that the ultra Orthodox was most affected in corona, and I couldn't find any English headline that were reporting that the Haredim are suffering from corona, and not slandering them, not saying it's their fault because they can't keep the rules, because they have so many children, because they keep meeting their friends. So I felt the social capital is actually a double sword position. The Haredim were affected because they have such a strong social capital, they have such strong ties and connections. So they were sick because of it, but they were happy also. They kept themselves in a positive position just because they have such a strong capital force going for them. And the third point that I would like to point to is my line of research that deals with poverty within the community. So I have quite a long line of research dealing with poverty and how it affects identity, how it correlates with choices people make in their lives. And one data that keeps coming is that people in the Haredi community, a lot of time, when they have to make some choices, they do not choose money. And this is one of the reasons why they are poor. They, in many crossing points in their life, when they have to choose money and work, they choose otherwise. Usually they choose spirituality, they choose learning Torah, they choose all kind of things, other things. And some of their explanation is quite striking and quite deep and interesting, the way that they relate to meaning and to the other dimensions that life has to offer. But I think what really comes for me from this data is actually this trade-off that they make to choose spirituality and to choose life of meaning over money comes out very handy when you have an epidemic and the economy is really breaking down, and that's what keeps you going, and everyone else is depressed, but you, given your different set of values and rules, you actually keep yourself in a very strong mental position. So thank you. And I would like to take some questions. I understand that I'm gonna have all the questions at the end of the session, right? Amazing.
Right.
Thank you. Okay.
So thank you so much,
Pleasure.
Dr. Yaffe, for that very meaningful and pertinent presentation. It was really, really fascinating. Next presenter specializes in mapping and anticipating the global demographic challenges that we will all face as a result of changes to fertility, migration, mortality. Dr. Isaac Sasson is a lecturer in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Tel Aviv University, and his insights highlight the population challenges to our world and this century and how we should prepare for them. To tell us more, then, over to you, Dr. Sasson.
Thank you very much. So I was asked to talk today about demographic challenges in the 21st century. And this is a very difficult task to accomplish in just 15 minutes. So I'll try to focus on 3 of the most urgent issues as I see them today. And I want to start by just introducing what demography is, because I know a lot of people ask me, what is demography? So very briefly, demography is the study of population change. And when I say change, I mean to change, I refer to change in size, age structure, and spatial distribution. Now, the 3 fundamental demographic processes through which populations change are fertility, migration, and mortality. And demographers have a very simple view of the world. People are born into it, they move around, and eventually they die. And this is the stuff that interests us demographers. And I will try to structure my talk around these 3 processes, but I will focus mostly on fertility and mortality because migration is very hard to predict, although I will say something about it toward the end. Okay. So I'd like to start with the basic demographic facts, and this is a map from the UN Population Division, and it shows the total fertility rate by country, or the average number of births a woman is expected to have during her reproductive years across different nations. And it's a bit maybe difficult to read, but basically all the light colors, the yellows and the orange, they're just above, just below replacement level fertility, or just roughly 2 births per woman. And the darker colors are fertility that's higher than replacement level fertility. So basically, populations, all the populations in yellow and orange are expected to decline over time, to diminish in size, because each couple, on average, has fewer than 2 kids to replace them. This is why it's called replacement level fertility. Whereas the darker parts, as we can see, it's mostly sub-Saharan Africa and a few countries in Asia, Central Asia, have over replacement level fertility, which means that they will continue growing over time. And the exception, of course, being sub-Saharan Africa, where fertility remains high. And this directly leads to the next slide that I want to show you. So I want you to keep in mind this map when I show you the projected global population growth in the coming century. So again, this is from the UN Population Division, a projection of the global population size from today, about roughly 7.5 billion. And by the end of the century, we expect to have an added 4 billion people. But I think the interesting part here, considering the previous slide, is that if the 19th century was marked by rapid European population growth, and the 20th century was dominated by East and South Asian population growth, that the 21st century is for sure going to belong to Africa, if we talk about population growth on a global scale. So by the end of the century, for example, the UN predicts that Nigeria will become the third most populous nation with a population approaching 1 billion. And in the words of demographer David Lamb, the next 4 billion, the projected blue part in the curve, the next 4 billion will be old rather than young, and will be in Africa rather than in Asia. So this means that the world's population will grow in the poorest countries, and especially in an era of climate change. And I think this poses serious challenges for both food security, global poverty, because these are the poorest nations and facing the most challenges, where we're going to see population growth in the coming several decades. So if just to give you a sense of how much rapid this growth is, African population today is roughly 1 billion people, and it's projected to grow fourfold by the end of the century, with a little more growth in the Middle East. And most other regions are projected to be stable or even decline, particularly Europe, which I'm going to get to in a bit. So demography has a long tradition of studying behavioral responses to rising population pressures on the natural environment and resource scarcity. And I think here we're a bit different from other social sciences, in that the family, rather than individuals, have always been, or the family has always been, the fundamental unit of analysis, because the family is where both economic and reproductive behavior takes place. So the question is, how do families respond to growing environmental and population pressures? You know, with population grows, it exerts pressure on the environment and on natural resources. And the question is, how do families respond, and especially in those regions that I just mentioned? And I think previous research tells us that they may do so by diversifying their livelihood strategies, by adjusting their fertility levels, or sometimes even by migrating to where resources are more abundant. But things are not always as simple as they seem. And I think here, Malthus, who's probably the most famous demographer historically, may have been wrong in predicting that fertility should decline in the face of resource scarcity. And this is a recent study that a colleague of mine and I have published a few years ago, looking at 4 West African countries, looked at hundreds of communities, and we combined demographic and social survey data with remotely sensed or satellite imagery of vegetation cover over a long period of time. And we wanted to see what happens in communities that become impoverished in terms of natural resources, whether they have fewer or more kids in general. So what is their demographic response, at least in terms of fertility? And we're very surprised to find that it's actually poor families in environmentally degraded communities that often increase their fertility to meet growing labor demands in the household. So I think this is counterintuitive. And if we expected from the Malthusian logic for fertility to go down, it may actually go up in those most affected communities. So I think rapid population growth may, this was about fertility, but also has implications for migration, because it creates a push factor in the poorest countries for skilled and unskilled labor to try to find a better life elsewhere, which we're already seeing today in part. And this in turn may fuel nationalist and populist movements in the rich countries or the receiving countries, as we're already witnessing today. And I think this trend is likely to increase in the coming decades, or definitely in the coming century. And while demography is not destiny, it certainly shapes the structural determinants or elective affinities, in the Weberian terms, under which human action occurs. And I think for me, population growth, but not just growth in itself, but where it's going to take place, is as a serious challenge for the 21st century. The flip side of, if you again started with fertility, but this fertility map that I've shown you earlier leads directly to the second global challenge that I'm foreseeing in this coming century, and that is population aging. And again, if I were to show you a world map of the percentage of population aged 65 and over, it would be a mirror image of the map that I just showed you with fertility, because the countries that have the lowest fertility have the fastest aging population. So this is a population pyramid from 1950 for the population of Europe entirely. And it resembles a pyramid. I think this is where we draw the name. It resembles a pyramid where we have a very wide base of children and a working age population. And as we progress through the ages, we see the numbers diminishing. And this is why it was traditionally called a pyramid. But if we look at Europe today, or the forecast projection for 2050, we see a very different picture. And we're already observing this trend, this reversal of the pyramid, and it's basically being repositioned upside down, where the highest numbers of people are actually in older ages with a very thin base of the pyramid. And I think this again poses a serious challenge, not only for Europe, but Europe is the sort of the most obvious example, but we're seeing this in many other countries and regions of the world, in China, in Japan, in North America, slightly less so, but it's also as well. And in some respects, this will also happen in Latin America in the near future. And I think another way to see this is maybe look at OECD countries and the incoming cohorts, the size of cohorts incoming into the labor market, and the size of cohorts retiring from the labor market. And actually, very recently, we've observed the beginning of a demographic deficit in which the incoming cohorts, those who are age 20 to 24, are in absolute numbers smaller than those leaving the labor force or soon to leave the labor force at age 60 and 64. And this demographic deficit, I think, really makes us, basically force us to think harder about the potential breakdown of social and economic institutions, such as state pensions, universal health care. And I think the demographic deficit is threatening to increase intergenerational tensions that we're already seeing, starting to see in many countries, rich countries, especially in large and urban areas, where we know that housing tends to increase in price. And again, with the sort of the receding welfare states in many countries, I think this tension will likely to increase in the coming future. And finally, I would like to discuss mortality, which is closest to my research area. And I think I really like this figure because it gives us, in a very succinct way, almost 500 years or 400 years of demographic change. And this is unfortunately not from my own research, but this is a very classic study. I will soon show you results from my own research, but this is a very classic study showing remarkable increase in life expectancy at birth in countries where we have historical record. In this case, we see England and Wales dating back to the mid-16th century, almost to the present. And in Sweden, from the late 18th century, roughly the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, up to present day. And I think we sometimes forget how remarkable and unprecedented this change has been, because we've seen, of course, the richest nations increase, maybe triple their life expectancy at birth, and many of them are surpassing 80 years of age today. But this has been shared by many other countries, including poorer countries, especially since World War II. And we've seen that on a global scale, life expectancy more than doubled in the last 200 years or so. So this is the positive side. But I think there's a very disturbing trend that we're starting to see in the last several decades, but we've only been researching this in the last decade or so in a serious way. And this is where my research, current research, comes in. And this is basically just showing you the rising significance of socioeconomic status for longevity, or in this case, the education gap in life expectancy from the mid-60s to almost present day. And I think what's remarkable about this figure is that we're seeing diverging trends in life expectancy. In this case, it's adult life expectancy, about roughly age 30. And we're seeing the gap between the most educated and the least educated groups in each of those societies. And I emphasize that these are very different countries. On the one hand, all of these are rich countries, Western countries, very wealthy on some level, but at the same time, they have very different socio-political contexts. So it's not just the US that is known for its social disparities, but it's also Finland, one of the most egalitarian countries today. And all of them are experiencing this trend more or less of diverging trends in life expectancy between socioeconomic groups. And I won't show you too many figures, but we see this in this case in education. We also see in another study we focused on Finland, we've shown this the same trend in income, in occupation, and basically we see this divergence between, and it could be up to 6 or even 10 year difference between the highest rungs of the socioeconomic ladder compared to the lowest rungs of the ladder. And this really, I think it's alarming in the sense that if in the beginning of the 20th century, we've seen rapid increase in life expectancy that was shared by almost everyone, and largely due to centralized health initiatives or health policies. For example, one example would be water chlorination, which benefited everyone. But in this case, we're seeing as disease profiles change from acute infectious diseases toward chronic diseases that we're unable to cure today. We mostly manage them and live with them for a very long time, but they're also acquired over a very long period throughout the life course over many years through exposure to either healthy lifestyles or unfortunately to social adversity. And I'm talking here about diabetes, heart disease, and so on and so forth. We've seen that this in part is driving these trends that we're seeing here. And as I said, this trend is shared across high-income countries, including the most egalitarian ones. Individuals of high socioeconomic standing, whether education, income, or occupation, are better positioned to benefit from our newfound ability to control disease and death. And I think, sadly, over the past 50 years, we've seen social inequalities in mortality widen substantially, and this trend is likely to continue in the coming decades. And again, even the richest and most egalitarian countries are failing at ensuring equal and increasing improvements, health improvements to the entire population. Now, I would like to emphasize that this is not merely an issue of access to healthcare, because whenever I give these talks, people think, well, maybe it's about healthcare. If we improve access to healthcare, things are going to look better. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as investing in more hospital beds or anything like that, because we know that disease onset occurs much earlier in life in those lower income, lower education groups. And by then, there's only so much that modern medicine can do. It can alleviate some of those symptoms and maybe help with some of the, maybe delay the disease progression, but it's really unable to basically ameliorate entirely the health conditions of those poor groups. And it's not just a matter of poor versus rich. It's really a gradient that we see that the more income you have, the more education you have, the better your health is on average. And I think for the most part, we're unable to cure chronic diseases. We merely manage them. And this is a problem that is we're facing today that is much more difficult than just another vaccination campaign that is very easy and sometimes cheap relatively to push forward. So a major challenge for the 21st century is to ensure that all population segments benefit from our improved capacity to ensure good health. So just to summarize my sort of view on the demographic challenges in the 21st century, rapid population growth in the most vulnerable yet least prepared countries is occurring, and the least prepared both economically and politically. I think we're going to have to, in the coming decades, need to redesign welfare models to ensure intergenerational fairness in a better way. I haven't touched upon migration a lot, but increasing diversity among migrants. On the one hand, a very high share of high-skilled migrants. On the other hand, a growing share of refugees. I think it has the potential to raise nationalist and populist sentiments in the receiving countries. And lastly, rising life expectancy for advantaged groups, while others are left behind. This is a trend that we're seeing for several decades now, which means, in my view, that we need to re-emphasize centralized rather than individualized health policies that we've seen in the last 40 or 50 years. Placing these campaigns that place they try to raise awareness, but at the end of the day, they stop on our doorstep, and it really leads to sometimes even increasing inequalities, because the people or the groups who are most able, they have the leisure time, they have the money to exercise, to eat well, to pursue all of these recommendations, are the ones who are better off compared to the ones that the lower socioeconomic groups. So thank you for your attention, and I will welcome questions on these topics.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sasson, for that compelling and clear presentation, which I think dovetailed well with the presentation of Dr. Yaffe before you. And now for something completely different, as they say, we move back to Professor Amir Ayali. I hope you've sorted out your technical problems.
It seems that I have, yeah. It seems like we're on. Yeah.
So over to you.
So you can see my screen and yeah. Okay, so I should say now for something a little different or completely different. I'll be talking about the locust crisis on at least my take of the locust crisis, the current locust crisis. And if you haven't followed the headlines relating to locusts as I obsessively do, let me just show you a few of them. And they're talking about a humanitarian crisis in Africa. They're talking about the most devastating plague in Africa history. They're talking about, let's go on for the next one, the worst locust crisis ever, or in recent history, at least in massive scale in Africa. And it goes also to the other side of the Indian Ocean. In Pakistan, a national emergency, the worst locust plague in many decades. In India, India faces worst ever pest invasion. India suffering one of the worst locust attack, etc., etc., etc. So what actually happened in this year, or actually in recent years, that made headlines such as those? What happened actually started in something like 2 years ago, in 2018, where a couple of unusual cyclones in the Indian Ocean affected what's called the empty space in the Arabian desert, turning one of the most extreme deserts to lush green and a very wet environment. So climate change, global warming is to blame here. What started at 2018 actually spread out and led to infestation of locusts in regions that are traditionally spring and summer breeding regions. And this actually was followed by more cyclones in the fall of 2019, which led to consequent increases of locust numbers in two major areas, at the Pakistan-India border and in the Horn of Africa. So we're talking several consecutive generations, each one at least 20 to 400 times larger than the previous one, leading to what started as an outbreak, an upsurge, and almost a flood. Now, this is only one part of our blame in what happened. The other part is geopolitical instabilities, mostly in Yemen and in Somalia. And currently, the only, or the best and only practice against locust events is constant monitoring and treatment at very early stages of outbreaks. This was not possible in Yemen, in Somalia, because of the geopolitical instability. So these two areas served as reservoir, constantly supplying more and more locusts to the neighboring region and to the other side of the Indian Ocean. Now, what is predicted based on that is that from now on, one of two things might happen. This sort of cycle might then repeat and increase as we go on, or locusts would move to the more traditional, actually, recession area at the Sub-Sahel in countries like Mauritania, Mali, Nigeria, Chad, that are currently not experiencing locusts, but have known to be hit very severely by locusts. So this is the very current from last week's situation. The red dots are swarms of locusts affecting these regions. And basically, all what I've just told you is under the heavy blanket or heavy clouds of the COVID-19 situation. So basically, in a normal situation, the headline that I've showed you would have been constantly on top of everybody's mind throughout the past 2 years. because of the COVID-19 situation, they are practically almost ignored. This is one aspect of the effect of the coronavirus on the locust situation. The other is, of course, a direct effect. Because of the lockdown, the limited mobility, pesticides are more difficult to move around. Experts are more difficult to move around, and the countries that are affected don't get the help that they could and should have be offered. So currently, we're actually talking. This is from a couple of weeks ago. Now the predictions are talking. We're talking about tens of millions of people in severe food insecurity. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that are already spent and going to be spent in the very near future. And if we fail, as at the moment it seems that we're talking about increase of the catastrophe by a scale, if not more. So this was very recent headlines. I'd like to go back a bit and move to some less recent headlines. And these are very familiar to practically everybody. This is one of them, of course. And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thy hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come up upon the land of Egypt and eat every herb of the land, even all that the hail have left. And the Lord brought an east wind upon the land all that day and all that night. When it was morning, the east wind brought the locust. And the locust went up over all the land of Egypt and rested in all, etc., etc., etc. So this is very well known, but actually this is not the only old script mentioning this phenomena. It appears actually in practically all the script of the old world. Would it be the Quran, the Iliad, the Mahabharata? All these and actually others describe extreme locust events. So basically, if I wouldn't have told you the story backwards in time, the question to be asked is, have we solved the locust problem? And since you already know that we haven't, the next question, of course, should be, how come we still haven't solved the locust problem? So this is a problem, a most devastating problem that has been with us for thousands of years. How come we haven't solved it yet with modern science and everything? So one major reason is that locust outbreak, upsurges, flood, as I mentioned, alternate with long recession periods. So this is actually the best record that we have, almost 2,000 years record of locust outbreaks in China. And what you can see is that it oscillates, okay? And if we sort of zoom in this is not from China, this is from the UN actually, more recent times. This is from starting at the 1860 to nowadays. We did see very long periods of outbreaks, but in between there's always long and recently even longer periods of recession. And this is in a way a major problem, because we're not, as humans, we're not very good at dealing with something that has been in the past or will be in the future, but is not present at the moment. And these long recession times mean that actually research, mostly research money, is not invested in the locust problem when there is no outbreak. And this is a major problem ever since modern science started to deal with locusts. Now, but it's not the only problem. The other problem is that we are actually experiencing major gaps in our knowledge about locusts. Locusts are, the locust phenomena is an extremely complex, complicated phenomenon. Actually, it's only less than 100 years, or practically 100 years, since we realized what actually locusts are. Sir Boris Mints, an acclaimed entomologist, insect scientist, actually in 1921 came up with the idea that what is actually happening is that different species of grasshoppers are practically the same species, meaning that the species that we see when there's a recession of locusts, when there's no swarms or migration, and suddenly when there's an outbreak, this other species that we see are actually the same locust species that exhibit density-dependent polymorphism or polyphenism. Now, this means that the same exact animal looks different, behaves different in different conditions, density conditions. Now, since almost 100 years ago, since this idea came up, we have actually advanced quite a lot in understanding this phenomena. And this phenomena is the key to our understanding and solving the locust problem, of course. So we have made major advances, but as this paper that I've just published last year suggests, it's still a puzzle in many senses. And there's so many challenges yet to overcome in order to really understand and to handle this problem. This is a complex phenomenon. And to give you some hints, I'll go back to the old script, to some ancient wisdoms. So this is one of them. The Lord turned, remember, the east wind brought the locusts, and the west wind actually took the locusts away. So this is actually an important idea, because only recently we actually totally realized that our only way to predict the movement of the swarms is using meteorological weather models. So currently, the prediction of where the locusts will go tomorrow, next month, or in a couple of months is solely based on our knowledge, our satellite information, etc., about weather, climate, the world winds, etc. So we're taking advantage of the fact that the flying swarms are going mostly with the wind. But beyond that, we don't know much about where they're going. Another old wisdom is this: they camp in the hedges in the cold day, and when the sun rises, they flee away. Again, this cycling of the behavior of the swarm is very much dependent on temperature. This is actually, again, an important practice that we now use, because we realized that the only way we can actually catch the swarms is very early in the morning when they are still sedentary. Later on during the day, they can take up flying, and they can fly something like 100, 150 kilometers a day. So actually it's a chase, it's a constant chase. And if we go to current situation in Africa, this chase actually is done in very, very limited resources. I mean, at the early months of this crisis, all the affected areas actually enjoyed the services of just a handful of Cessna planes, not talking about helicopters at all. Now, as we advance a bit, there's one helicopter and a few, something like 5 planes that are chasing the locusts. But this is a major problem in the region. Now, a final quote here from the old wisdom here is that the locusts have no king, yet they go forth, all of them by bands. Now, this is a really interesting and important observation on the behavior of the swarm. It relates to a very important phenomena, ecological and, of course, economical phenomena. And this phenomena is collective motion. Now, we all know what collective motion is. We know collective motion from herds of herbivores in the large plains. We know it from birds doing their amazing pirouettes in the sky. This is actually from the northern Negev desert in Israel, near Beersheba. We know collective motion from schools of fish. And these are nice examples of these. But collective motion is also known from bacteria, from cancer cells, and of course from humans. So we are very good at collective ordered motion, synchronized motion. And actually, what I've shown you, all these phenomena have one thing in common: the emergence of order from a disordered state. And this is why this phenomena has attracted physicists, mathematicians, computer scientists, and of course biologists for a couple of decades already. We are really, really interested in what is actually happening here. How come this order emerges? Now, locusts, I would argue, are a really good model system to study this phenomena, this general phenomena. Okay, and one of the reasons is, of course, that locusts are spectacular. So this is again from Israel, when I was lucky in 2013 to witness a tiny little outbreak of locusts. And you stand on the hill, and as far as your eyes can see, the whole land is actually moving in synchrony. So it's an amazing phenomenon. Another interesting advantage of locust is that this phenomena in locust is density dependent. And this actually relates to an important aspect of swarming in general, the scalability. So once a threshold density is achieved, 500, 5,000, 5 million, 5 billion locusts behave exactly the same. So the rules are exactly the same, okay? The last aspect that make a locust a good model for study is that they can easily be studied in the lab. So this is from my own lab. What you do is you put a bunch of locusts together and they'll start spontaneously demonstrate their collective synchronized motion. Okay, so I'm not talking about the flying adults, I'm talking about the marching larvae, the nymphs. These are the ones that you just saw in the field. So what we do is we glue a little barcode to each one of them, and we can use computer vision and high-tech softwares to actually give us a continuous monitoring of each of these animals throughout a very, very long experiment in 25 frames per second. So we can come up with the statistics of what's happening there at the level of the individual, of the level of the group, etc. And the challenge is exactly what I've presented. The challenge is to realize what are the local interactions, okay, at a very minute scale that actually give rise to this very wide macro scale behavior of the swarm. Okay, so for instance, one of the early things that we've done is we looked at the visual field of the locust. So the interaction is purely almost practically only visual, and locusts having their eyes on the side of the head actually see almost 360 degrees around them. So if you divide their field of view to front and back, what we came up with, or the idea that we came up with, is that they'll start moving with the swarm when one of two things happen. One is animals in front of them will move away, so they'll tend to follow animals that are leaving their front field of view, and or when there's an increase in numbers in their back field of view. So one of these things is what generates initiation of movement. So what we think is that while the swarm moves continuously, the individual within the swarm actually are taking repeated decisions regarding assessing their nearby environment and deciding if and where exactly to go. And the local scale is something like 10 centimeters around the animal. Now the question, of course, is the animal capable of doing the necessary calculation that I'm suggesting here, counting the animal around it, etc., etc.? And the answer is yes, but we don't know much about how it does it actually. And this is what we're studying in my lab currently. So we take an animal, we tether it, we place it on a floating air cushion ball, let it walk freely in a way, naturally, while we present it with visual stimuli on computer screens. Now we both monitor the movement of the ball, so we have the direction of the animal walking, and we monitor the position of the animal, so we have all the information about the behavior of that animal. Now, the animal can answer questions. The animal will walk in a specific direction, which is the result of the visual stimuli that we are presenting it. So we can ask the animal questions and it can answer us, okay? Now we can also not only look at behavior, but also record the neuronal activity. So basically we can hook onto the neurons or the nerves of the animal, mostly the ones that pass the visual information to the motor centers. And we can do that while presenting the animal with a looming stimuli like this one. And this is what we record, the electrical information that passes within the animal, or a receding stimuli like this one. So we'll have the typical response of the nervous system and of the animal to looming and receding stimuli. Okay, so they perceive it, they process it, they respond to it. Okay, and we actually also show that they respond to these kind of stimuli much stronger when they are within a swarm. Okay, so this one of the hallmark of swarming behavior is the increased response to this behavior. Now, as I said, we can ask the animal questions, okay, in the form of dots moving in different directions. So in this case, we're showing an animal random dots moving in all directions, and we're asking the animal which is the direction that you actually identify. And the animal will go, I don't know, I can't identify any specific direction. So we'll say, okay, and now, in this case, half of the dots are actually moving in the same direction, and the animal will respond by moving in that direction. Now we can ask the animal, does the color of the dots matter to you? Does the size of the dots matter to you? What about their shape, etc., etc., etc.? So we have here a system where we can interrogate the animal and come up actually with the algorithms that the animal uses in order to generate collective swarming behavior. Now we could take these algorithms and test them by putting them into a tiny little robot. And this little tiny robot, if we are successful in pulling out the right algorithm, the right answers from the locust, we'll be able actually to join a moving swarm of locusts. If we were correct in our predictions about exactly what the animals are taking out of the environment, how they're making the decision, etc., etc. And if it works, we can actually manufacture a whole bunch of these types of little robots. And actually, we have a company in Migdal Emek who is currently building us little robots, autonomous little devices that can actually do that. So then our next goal in this project is going back to the field, building a hybrid locust robotic swarm. And of course, swarm robotics has a lot of applications in real life that I won't go into, but at the moment we're using them to study the locust actually. And there's a whole list of other research topics that we are studying in my group here. Again, the swarming related decision making, sensory perception and processing, how exactly a locust in a 10 billion locust swarm actually extracts the relevant information from this extremely noisy and chaotic visual scene. Okay, we don't know much, practically nothing, about the evolution of this phenomena. How is it that there are several actually species of locusts? One currently actually outbreaking in Brazil and Argentina. Others periodically outbreaking in Australia. They're totally not connected to each other phylogenetically. They're from different families, but they show the exact same phenomena. So we don't know much about the evolution of this phenomena. And other much related questions. All of them actually aimed at bridging this knowledge gap that actually is partly to blame for our incapacity to still handle the local situation. So thank you very much for inviting me actually for this interesting session. Although I'm an oddball, as I feel in this among these talented researchers. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor Ayali, for taking our minds from one plague to another possible one, which is locusts. Certainly a fascinating subject. And now our final presenter is Boris Mints Institute Fellow, Eve Gutterman. Her presentation, entitled Behind the Wicked Problems, is extremely topical and relevant to many debates on contemporary culture. She will explain how distributed ledger technology can help to make institutions fairer, more equal, and more decentralized. The floor is yours, Eve Gutterman.
There we go. Thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you very much to Itai and to Dr. Mints and the board for including me in this panel of very impressive scholars. So is my presentation up and looking good?
We can see your presentation. I don't see you at the moment.
Exactly sure how to fix that, but maybe we will just, for the sake of time, push forward. So what I am presenting to you today is a portion of my doctoral research in the Department of Public Policy. And if we started with people on this panel and then we moved to locusts, now we're going to move to institutions. And particularly, particularly the idea that some of our institutions are in crisis. And particularly those institutions that were meant to protect social welfare are not exactly doing that job anymore. And when I say social welfare, I'm basically referring to the welfare state and to these institutions of education, pension, health, a number of which have already been brought up by some of our other lecturers today. And so why? Okay?
Yeah, you're good. Keep going.
And so why do we feel like these institutions are in crisis? What is going on? What's changing? Well, we know from empirical studies that inequality is increasing. We're not exactly sure why. We know that inequality is bad for growth. We are in an new extended period of globalization. We're in a new period of information technology. And what we are seeing is a massive transfer of assets from the lower and middle classes to the 1%, and which is Piketty's primary finding. And so what we don't know is how this is happening, why it's happening, and is anything actually different, or is this just kind of the natural result? And I will argue in this research that the problems that we're dealing with today are not new at all, in fact, but they're the same problems that have been plaguing policymakers and political theorists and philosophers since the beginning of Enlightenment and modernity. And so these problems are referred to in the literature as the wicked problems of social science. In other words, planning or policy problems that are so complex that they're mathematically proven to have no solution. And these 5 problems that I've laid out on the slide in front of us are what we believe to be the lowest common denominator of all human problems of exchange and interaction. So these are the 5 most basic problems that are referred to as the wicked problems that we are looking to take a dive into to look if we can come up with better solutions to solve them. Now, what makes these 5 problems so difficult and unsolvable? At the base of them, the answer is we as human beings do. These are inherently human problems that deal with irrational hierarchies of preference, asymmetrical information, and what we get as a result are policy problems that we can't even agree on how to identify the problem, let alone go about solving it. And so what happens when we can't solve these wicked problems? Well, there are wasted resources to both the individual and society, a disproportionate burden on the welfare state, and a beautiful model for looking at this comes from the most recent Boris Mints Institute winner, Professor Sabina Al-Khair, who came up with the multidimensional poverty index. And so it's this idea that poverty isn't just income poverty, but the things that promote inequality and demographic inequality and social service inequality, whether it's the Haredi response to the coronavirus or whether it's demographic threats in society, that poverty is multidimensional. And that all of those elements together get at someone's inability to be resilient to shocks. And so what do these multidimensional poverty vectors do? They reduce competition in the market, they reduce economic growth, and they reduce social welfare. So let's talk about what this looks like in real life. The coronavirus obviously is very much on everyone's mind and has been referenced in almost all of the presentations today. And so we look at the coronavirus as an example of a public bad problem gone entirely wrong. So if a public good is healthcare or good air quality or whatever, then a public bad would be air pollution, or in this case, the spread of a disease. And so as we see, there's a disproportional impact on the poor. What we see from coronavirus is actually a redistribution of wealth during a recession, where the number of billionaires increased and their wealth increased while millions of people are unemployed. We see the dissemination of disinformation creating a loss to society, right? Whether it's in Israel or in the United States, we've seen countries all over the world bungle their response to the coronavirus, and a huge factor in that is the inability to differentiate between fact and fiction, and the inability to trust information. And so what we see in coronavirus is not only a massive loss of life and economic action, but we're also seeing an enormous increase in inequality. And this is not the first time, even in the last decade, that we've experienced something like this, because the 2008-2009 financial crisis was another example where this one we like to categorize as a principal agent problem to the extreme, and in the sense of information asymmetry. And so information asymmetry about the quality of access to loans resulted in nearly 10 million Americans losing their home. And so we have more information available to more people as a result of technology, and yet we are less able to discern the quality of that information, less able to coordinate, to regulate, and to collaborate in the face of these crises. And so what is preventing us from doing that? Now, in order to understand the answer to that question, we have to revisit these wicked problems under the new conditions of our economy. So if these wicked problems originally were the failure of institutions to overcome issues of scarcity, whether that be scarce capital, scarce rights to identify and enforce property rights, scarce access to scarce natural resources, or scarcity of information, what we're seeing now is actually the opposite of that. Under globalization and the information age, what we see actually is a shift to information as a resource that is non-scarce, non-rival, and works quite differently than our original ideas of scarcity. And so that begs the research question that we are dealing with in my doctorate, which is, can we design new and more efficient institutions using digital and technological innovation to overcome the wicked problems under conditions of non-scarcity, meaning now? And so this is where I introduce the wonder technology that is distributed ledgers or blockchains, which by their very nature are decentralized. They facilitate cooperation, they have full transparency, and they are immutable. And so by definition, they can minimize misinformation, minimize transaction costs, minimize the ability to lie, because they are automating trust, this thing that humans by definition have been very unable to implement well. And so if we go back to this idea of what information, what our highest value inputs look like in the economy, the idea of breaking these monopolies by using decentralized ledger technologies actually may very well be the answer to all of our problems. So what we claim in this research basically is the idea that all of the wicked problems that we've identified as the lowest common denominator of all human problems can actually be folded in to what I am calling the unholy monopoly trinity. That means the interplay between the monopoly over one of three things: information, capital, or governance. And so if we revisit the wicked problems as monopoly problems, then the solutions to these problems may be in a technology that breaks up monopolies. So the institutional mechanisms for this vicious monopoly cycle actually have interplay in both directions. So a monopoly on any of these high value inputs, whether they be information, governance, or capital, works in conjunction with the others to be able to protect those monopolies and maintain growing levels of inequality and make all of our resources and institutions less inclusive. So the hypothesis of the study is that if we are able, using this technology, to break any of these monopolies, any one of the three, then we claim that the ability to do that will disrupt these mechanisms here, and as such will decrease market competition, increase economic expansion, that by breaking any of these monopolies, we will increase market competition, increase economic expansion, and increase social welfare. And the idea is that by doing so, you actually break all of the mechanisms and you come up with a new virtuous cycle of non-monopoly interplay between these things. And I guess I would like to contextualize this ideal in the idea that we are living in a time where the most profitable companies in the world are profiting over their monopoly access to data and information that we create. And if that's the dynamic that we are beginning with, then as climate change goes on, as demographic threats increase, all of the inequality-related threats that we talked about previously, these monopolies stand to increase the threat of those changes. And so the ideal that I would like to present and that we hope to prove through case studies is that by introducing a decentralized technology and breaking one of these modern monopolies, that we actually stand to free enormous amounts of value in the economy that can then flow back to the average citizen, creating greater equity in our world, and hopefully improving the outlook on the other side of this demographic, or on the other side of the coronavirus threat, and hoping that the next time that we see a threat like this, that it will not highlight the extent of our inequalities and institutional failures. So thank you very much for your time, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Eve Gutterman, for that very topical presentation, and you certainly raised interesting questions. We do have a time for some questions from our viewers, but before that, Professor Sened or any member of the Boris Mints Institute board, would you like to ask a question or make a comment? Dr. Mints, would you like to say something?
Very interesting for me. This the first presentation is for me was very surprised, but maybe idea is very close. Maybe it is very important will be collaboration to teams for work the vertical field and the garden. My opinion, maybe I have mistake. I don't know, but about the presentation, Dr. Isaac Sayson, but I think during 18 years situation in Nigeria will have changed, but the global fundamental trend must be changed. It is, but now we don't have instrument to understand what will be the next 10s, 20s, 40s years. I think, but if we look at the dynamic for other countries like France and German, European, United States, we will have dynamic for during the same period change. No, but it is very important for your investigation in the future, I think. Thank you so much. For me, it was very interesting, very interesting. Amir, Ali, Professor, unbelievable problem, unbelievable. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank you very
My
much.
pleasure.
And
If I may
I
respond.
agree with you. It was fascinating, and the repercussions for all of us are absolutely relevant. We have just a couple of questions from the audience. Ariella Berger asks Professor Ayali, she thanks you for your excellent presentation and asks, among other things, do you have a wish list of data that points to close the knowledge gaps that might be carried out on a country by country level? For example, are data specifics that you would want individual countries set up in order to monitor and predict the collective motion? And how optimistic are you that data science may definitively predict or manage future locust outbreaks? So, Professor Ayali.
So yeah, so there are four very good questions. Maybe I'll just briefly mention the first one. The first one relates to the pesticide and to the option of actually eating the locust. And of course, these are two opposing problems. One, the problem of dumping huge amounts of pesticide on fertile land or on even the natural reserves in Kenya is a major problem. And of course, you have to add to that most of these, or I shouldn't say most, but some of these chemicals are ones that in other parts of the world we're not using anymore sometimes. So this is a matter of cost and amounts, etc. And of course, once you spray the swarm, you cannot eat it. So yes, people in the world, even it's kosher even for Jewish people to eat locusts, which shows some sense. But people in the world do eat locusts. But of course, you can't base your diet solely on these creatures when they're present. So this is the different aspect of this. Now regarding wish list and how countries, basically it all comes down to collaboration, international collaboration. And actually Africa is a good example. In every region of Africa, there is a local organization, international local organization that is meant to constantly monitor local situation and collaborate on information, etc., etc. The problem, of course, is, as I've mentioned, is these recession times. Currently, when this plug arrived to Africa, actually, most of the countries that are part of the organization in that area didn't even pay their membership dues. So the organization was practically not working. So what we can do as an international community, relating to the question, what we can do as Israelis, is two major things. One, when there is a problem, donate money. Money is a major obstacle in dealing with the problem. But what we can do even better is collaborate around this problem. The more international collaboration there'll be, the better our chances to deal with. I mean, again, locally, in 2013 was a beautiful example. 2013, the regime in Egypt actually just shifted from Mubarak to Morsi. And our interaction, in our collaboration with the Egyptian actually just dropped at that time when Morsi was in power. This actually meant that we in Israel didn't get any pre-warning about the locust crossing the Sinai Desert. So in our region, of course, Saudi Arabia is a major country that is hit. Jordan could be. Most of the countries, we are at the very end of the affected area. But all the countries from here to the south and to the east are affected. Collaboration among them is crucial to handle the situation. So there's I mean, they're all good questions. I could go on and on, but we're probably short in time. The wish is to close the knowledge gap. Basic things like, okay, I did say that the flying swarms go downwind. We know that. However, when we ask, where are the marching nymphs going, we have no idea. We have no idea what actually dictates the direction of movement of these huge swarms that are walking. I mean, there's beautiful, amazing, actually terrifying descriptions from the 1915, how locust swarms actually climbed to Jerusalem. They actually covered most of Israel back then. We have no idea actually what dictates their movement. This is a practically unstudied question. So there's so many things that we should do, and we should do them. We should focus on locust research, not now, but between now and the next locust outbreak. I mean, back in the early 1900s, the British, having a very feeling responsible for the colonies, actually had a center dedicated to locust research. It's called the Locust Research Organization. Later on, it changed to the NRI, the National Research Institute, and then the FAO of the United Nations took it. But the idea was that you push research, locust research, as much further as you can, always, not only when there's an outbreak. So this is what is needed. Locusts are still the most expensive and important agricultural pest in the world, although we don't always read about them in the paper.
Well, thank you for that interesting answer. And we have another question from Professor Jankov I believe, to Dr. Yaffe, on your analysis of the Haredi Ultra Orthodox community. If you have little to begin with, you worry less. How about this as an explanation?
Hi, thank you very much for the question, and actually it's a great comment. I would think so, but the reason we look so deeply into economical effects is because we have data showing from the world that poor people and people that are worried about money are actually doing worse during Corona, meaning it's the other way around. Those poor people have very, very small margin. So for them losing a job, they don't have like plan B, they don't have savings. It's really their next day meal. And in Israel, the Haredim are really doing bad. So they should be extremely worried. They don't have investments. They don't have a cushion to fall off. So what we know from the worldwide and from Israel is actually they should be very worried. And we see in the data they are anxious, but it's not the same. There's other things that intervening and stopping them from being so depressed and anxious. So this is why it's so interesting, because they should really be worried, because it's not luxuries, it's really their bread. But thank you for the comment. It's great. It's exactly what needs to be asked at this point. So thank you.
Thank you. And perhaps a final question to Yves Guterman. Based on your analysis, which was very distressing, do you remain hopeful that we can tackle the situation in the future, and how would you recommend this?
Well, I have to say that some of the case studies that I will be evaluating in my doctorate that I've been following, particularly one about a community inclusion currency in Kenya, for a village in Kenya, their use of the DLT solution to coordinate exchange and to create a local community currency that worked in parallel with their national fiat currency actually allowed them to much more effectively disseminate information about coronavirus and about ways to where they knew to get soap for free, where there were hand washing stations, what the PPE kind of requirements were, etc. And then beyond that, the access to that data by all of the individuals, the access to their own consumption data by all the individuals using this currency empowered all of them to actually be able to better represent themselves and their interests in front of their local governments and national governments. And so I think that actually there's an enormous amount of potential in these technologies as a series of supplemental institutions to those that exist on a national and a local level that can help us to further invest in social capital, whether it's formalizing methods of social capital that exist in communities already, like in the Haredi community, or whether it has to do with just coordinating information in a better, more empowered way. I believe that this is the solution, actually, and it's quite hopeful. slowly, slowly.
Thank you, Professor Sennett. I saw you smiling there. Would you like to make some final comments?
I think it's kind of my job, but I think that everything we've seen today is incredibly optimistic, because these are very young scholars who tackle the essence of the real problems, and they actually have probably not ready to promote, but almost ready to promote partial and general solutions to very significant challenges that they have kind of worked out in 2 years, in 3 years, in 4 years. And I think that I think the beauty of the Boris Mints Institute is this breeding of this new generation of people, of very young people, who actually ask the right questions, and being as smart and extraordinary as they are, they actually come up with incredibly interesting solutions, which seem to suggest tons of optimism. So on this happy note, I will conclude with this observation, which I find to be extraordinary, to see these youngsters, looking at the right questions, coming up with these amazing ideas, and actually moving on to do something with them. I don't think there's anything more beautiful than that, except for the locust movement, which is amazing.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Sennett, for those wonderful remarks. And let me thank all our presenters for giving us a whirlwind tour of Israeli research and innovation with such potential to change the world for the better. And thank you personally to Dr. Boris Mints once again, the Boris Mints Institute, and everyone who made today's fascinating conference possible. Of course, let us finally thank all our viewers for joining us at the Boris Mints Institute 2020 Research Institute Conference. And I think you'll all agree this has really been a fascinating event. Thank you all for joining us, and good evening. Shalom to you all.
Shalom.